Hi.
I think we are live.
Okay, excellent. Well, it's nice to see you, Marnie.
It's nice to see you.
We're back again.
Yeah, it's a really interesting day for me to be having this conversation about caregiving and good choices, like in terms of having family conversations and what we need to be doing. As you know, I've been up caregiving for my grandmother, and
Mhm.
today she's really taken a turn. And but it's been such a good reminder of all the different parts of the family and what everyone's sort of responsible for and taken care of, and I'm really grateful for the other members of my family who have stepped up in different ways. So it's just I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Oh, well, I'm first of all, I'm sorry for your grandmother, and I that is tough, and it's hard to see someone you're caring for take a turn and move to the next place, and that's really hard. So I feel for you. Um, I'm glad we're having this talk too because I just came from I do in addition to the work I do, I volunteer twice a month and I go to area assisted living and I just have conversations with people. It's called Coffee and Conversations and I show up and chat about whatever they want. And it was really interesting today talking about that with people because there was a person there who is in this assisted living facility more for respite than anything else because she fell. She was living independently and she fell and broke an arm and I think fractured part of her shoulder. So, you know, just learning to do these new things for herself has been, and her feeling her loss of independence, which I think is the biggest thing that those of us in the sandwich generation, when we're caring for our person, that's what they're dealing with is this loss of independence. So it was very interesting. So it's very poignant.
Yeah, and it really is a strange mind shift to go from being a child or a grandchild, and having someone there who's making the decisions and sort of in control, and then sort of the reversal and the switch, and having to accept help and accept, yeah, being more in the caregiver role or being more in the position
Right.
where you're having to make choices for people or with people that you didn't have to do before, and that in itself
Mhm.
is a very strange dynamic to have to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and you and I've talked a lot about these different things. So we wanted to do these four series of four conversations and talk about different aspects. And I mean, today we were just going to talk about starting critical conversations, and that's what it is. It's like at some point, and I always say, I always say, people get tired of hearing me. I say early and often because the earlier you can start, and sometimes it doesn't have to be this morbid conversation. S- I think I was musing on this with somebody today, earlier today, that we don't live in villages anymore, like we used to, where we saw life and death as a normal natural process that was happening all the time and people supported each other, right?
Yeah.
And now we're sort of disconnected in a lot of ways, and we also have this emphasis on um, longevity, and that's great. Have That's awesome. And so live your good life, live a good life, and that means sometimes being healthy. But we're not talking about enough sometimes about what's the end of life because there is going to be that for all of us. And so normalizing those conversations earlier on I think can be really helpful. So maybe they can occur naturally. Maybe at a family gathering somebody has died and we talk about it, and then that makes you think about, oh, what would I want for my end of life? What would I want at my funeral? I mean, it could be something really like that, but just
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah, and I think that to your point, like when we see things maybe go wrong or unexpectedly with either people in our circle or inner circle, it makes us really think about our own mortality and what we want.
Right.
And I think it's also a good opening when you're talking with other people in your family, um, by being like, so and so is going through this. It made me start to think about my own. Have you started to think about what you would like?
Right.
And it's kind of like a sort of an easeful way to start talking about it by kind of making it personal to yourself and kind of starting with like, I'm thinking about this and I'm really curious and I want to be able to make sure that I understand what you want. Um,
Right.
and so it kind of is like it's a gentle opening for starting
Right.
to have that conversation.
Yeah. And it's interesting as I've talked to more and more people, sometimes I was on a podcast once and one of the hosts, it was it's called Grandpa and Chill, and it was a young guy, maybe in his late 20s, and his grandfather is his co-host. And so it was interesting because the grandson wanted to be able to talk about end of life things, but the grandfather was like, no, I don't want to talk about it. Maybe for him it was a little too close to home and it was frightening. So I said, well, so maybe your conversations can be around how do you want to live? It doesn't have to be like I said, it doesn't have to be morbid. Like, what are the things that are important to you? And when I talk with folks, that's a really critical piece. What's really important to you? So when I talk to sandwich generation folks, and that's usually somebody who's raising children, and it could be their adult children and grandchildren living with them because people are coming back home, right?
Yeah.
And then or maybe they failed to launch in the first place. That happens too, but whatever it might be. And then seniors in your life, right? And so in that regard, it's just important to think about what are your values? What's your North Star? You, the person in the middle, what's your North Star? And what are, because that will guide you into how you're going to kind of walk through this journey a little bit.
Yeah, and
So,
it's such a difficult place to be because there are emotional tolls of struggling with, being pulled in both directions. It can be, there can be guilt if you're spending time with one, versus the other. And,
right.
how do you sort of balance your time and also making time for yourself and not feeling guilty when it's, time for
Yeah,
you to take a break and you to live your life. There's also financial tolls and like, how are you planning in advance? And that's another reason why having these conversations with your elders ahead of time to understand, okay, you want to age in place. I want to do that for you.
right.
How can we make that happen? Do you have long-term care insurance? What have you done to plan in advance? And if not, like how are we going to make up the difference and start having
Right.
those conversations so that if something were to happen, you don't get the shock of understanding that all of a sudden there's also a financial responsibility involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I wrote a book called Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. And one of the reasons I called it Building a Legacy of Love is because my parents had done that. And it was a wake up call to my husband and I when we started doing some managing of their care. I said to my husband, well, we need to do this. We need to form a trust. We need to start thinking about our money and insurance and what are the things because I didn't have to read my parents' minds. And here's the point I want to make on saying this. Both my parents died in 2015 and both had dementia. If we had waited long to have these conversations with them, we wouldn't have been able to have them to the same degree that we had them at the beginning of our journey because they had already had those conversations with each other. They met with an estate planning attorney, laid all the framework. So I got a blueprint. And that was so it was so impressive to me. That's why my husband and I did it. We wanted to lay out a blueprint so that our children didn't have to wonder, what do you want? Um,
It is
so
such a gift. It's such a gift to give to your loved ones to plan in
mhm,
advance, and that doesn't mean just estate planning documents, those although those are super important, but
mhm,
it's beyond that. It's getting granular about, okay, do you wanna age in place, or are you
right,
comfortable with living in a home? Or, are you wanting longevity? or do you want more quality versus quantity of life? What
Right.
is important to you at the end in terms of pain management
Yes.
and lucidity, these sort of conversations, or having them be involved with, body disposition questions about, do you want to be buried? Do you want
Right.
cremation? Is there a green burial option? What does
Yeah.
religion look like to you? Is it important or
Right.
not
Right.
important? And really, the more understanding you have, the better you can follow someone's wishes. And I think, a major problem is, with siblings or family members disagreeing about what is best at the end. And so, how can you be having these conversations in advance of disagreements? A lot of what I do
Right.
is facilitate family conversations within the generations so that, the adult children are hearing the wishes of the parents. And so, there's less need to fight at the end over, not believing the other person, or, there's so much family dynamics that come into play at the end, and so how can you sort of make sure you're doing all that you can to, have those important conversations in advance so it's not messy?
Yes, absolutely. And I like your phrasing of like getting granular, like talking about those things. And Marnie, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, those are
Totally.
hard. And there are people who, for whatever reason, it could be religion, it could be a faith practice, it could be superstition. I don't want to talk about these things. Um, I've even had people say, "Well, I'm not going to be if I'm dead, you decide. I don't care." And that seems like that would be so easy, right? But in fact, I think that's even more of a burden sometimes, to be honest with you, because then you might have a committee that needs to decide, and you can't come to. Whereas if you took the time to just say, "This is what I want," I mean, even just something as simple as burial versus cremation, that's an important thing, right? And so yeah, just biting the bullet and doing that. But can you tell us how you start those conversations, or what's a way that you would recommend starting those conversations?
Um, I mean, it's different for every family. Some families are going to go into it and be like, I don't want to talk about it. And I think, it's taking it slow. It's understanding that people are coming in with different dynamics at play, and to be like, I understand this is a really uncomfortable conversation, but I think it's really important that we feel prepared. And this is a real, this is I'm worried about not being able to do what's best for you if I don't understand. So this would be really clarifying for me, making sure that they understand that this is really like a gift to give. And I think it's also giving yourself grace that these conversations are going to be messy potentially, and they might take more than one shot at it.
Oh, yes.
Maybe you're not going to get through the first time. Maybe you're sort of like you feel, that it's not going anywhere. And it's okay to then pause and be like, you know what, I really do want to talk about this with you. Is there a time that would work better for you? Or like maybe there's some things that you need to think about. Maybe um here's some brochures or some websites that maybe you want to look at on your own and start to think about this, or here's a webinar and maybe we can talk about it afterwards. Bringing in other things, there's something called the Conversation Project that really sort of helps jumpstart these conversations also and gives really good advice. um,
Yeah.
and sometimes families are going to be like, oh yeah, everything's taken care of, don't worry about that. And I think in that moment, it can be good, like, oh, well, great. Like, is it okay if we review it? Can we talk about what those things are? And really making sure that, what needs to be done was taken care of. And
Yeah.
making sure that it's up to date. Some people will have a will that hasn't been updated in 30 years. Well, things have
Yes.
changed, or
Yeah.
beneficiaries on accounts, are the TODs what they should be?
Yeah.
I've worked with people who I said, maybe we should just check to make sure that your transfer on death, who is the beneficiary of your accounts, is updated. And they realized that it was an ex fiance or an ex partner, who, if you hadn't changed it, would then get everything afterwards. So it's also,
Yeah.
checking your own, what's going on in your own. So this is, a good reminder to kind of do both.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, we said these aren't one and done conversations. And
No,
you bring up a good point too, because listen, it is an investment in time and money to develop these documents, right? But you develop them, and then maybe 5 years down the road, maybe your assets, you've added to your assets. Are those named in there? Are things, yeah, all the little pieces we need to look at them. The other thing that sometimes changes is, at age 50, you might have a belief of, well, I want these measures to be taken if I'm ill. And then maybe something changes, maybe you develop a disease process that you don't want everything to be tried. You want to go a little bit more naturally or something. Or, we just don't know. So we have to kind of revisit those too. While our values might not change a whole lot, some of our specific requests or desires may shift as we grow and life changes. And so, yeah, maybe at 40 and 50, you're like, yeah, CPR, let's do it. Maybe at 80, you're like, I got brittle bones. I'm not really up to that. So
it's such a good point. It's such a good
yeah,
point. These aren't set it and forget it
yeah,
documents. It
yeah,
really is something to be checking and making sure, and again, when having these conversations with loved ones, it is really making sure that you have your own things in place and that their documents are in place. But,
right.
making sure that, yeah, their medical directives are up to date and we know who the healthcare proxy is going to be. Who is the power of attorney? Are these still the same people that you want in those roles, or
Exactly.
have family dynamics changed? Thinking
Yeah,
about the financial planning and the end of life wishes. Like you said, some people have been non-religious their whole life and then all of a sudden find religion at the end. And, these are things to be having sort of ongoing conversations. And in my own family, we didn't have these. And then it took an accident with my mother to start having these conversations. And now
yeah,
with both
yeah.
my parents, these are regular conversations. And I don't mean to that to sound dark. It doesn't have to be dark at all. Like it's
Mm-mm.
just part of day-to-day conversation where we just check in on something that we thought about, or
Yeah,
something comes up, and it really doesn't feel heavy anymore. It just feels like we're closer. We can have these conversations, and in
yeah,
many ways, like, it makes me feel like I can support them better now that we've really gotten deep about it in a way that we
yeah.
didn't before. And it didn't happen overnight. It really didn't.
Right, right, right. And you know what? Thank you for sharing that about your family's journey and how something happened and that changed everything. And I think similar to that, mine was similar. There was no event that occurred other than my parents had moved from Ohio out to California where I live, and I just kind of helped them. They were paying a lot of money for a tax attorney in San Francisco, and I said, I got an accountant who can do it. We can do this a little bit more cost effectively. But in looking in that, then we were like, oh, hey, we need to look also at the trust document and let's take a look at some things. They had developed this, 10 years prior, and circumstances had changed, right? I lived 5 minutes away from my parents, and now my sister had moved to another state, and my brother was far back in the East Coast. So we shook things up a little bit, not because I wanted all the responsibility, but because it didn't make any sense for it to be the way it had been laid out initially. My sister had gotten married and had kids, and so her circumstances had changed. There's just all kinds of things that happen. But once they did that, then, and I'm close to my brother and sister, so we started talking about it, and we ended up having fun with it. My parents would come to the table. We had one gathering, and my parents came to the table and they said, well, we want to tell you about, we've signed up for this cremation service. And we're all like, what? Oh my gosh, we're talking about this now. But, you know, it was we just kind of rolled with it, and then we just had fun. We were I know that sounds really weird, but
No,
maybe we
it's
have a weird sense of humor, but we looked at it as this is what's going to things are going to happen, and we have to be aware of that. And so then we started talking, here's some things. What about this? What about that? And I can't tell you what a relief it was at the end of their lives that I didn't have to think through difficult things. I was free to hold their hand and tell them I love them and make sure their wishes were completed as they had wanted them.
I love that, and I think that's such a good point that, like, at the end, you wanna be the child or the spouse, like, the partner. You don't wanna just be the caregiver. How are you getting the support that you need, whether it's from other
Right.
family or professional caregivers? How is it that you can just be present and then also
Right.
be able to grieve? But I think that those conversations and making them fun is such a good point also because it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. Like, similarly with my father, he paints in his free time. There are hundreds of paintings in the basement of these geometric paintings of he's colorblind, so they're all very colorful. But we're like, "Dad, what are we gonna do with hundreds of paintings?" And he was like, "You know what? Why don't we, anyone who comes to my funeral gets to pick a painting to go home with."
Oh,
And
oh
I'm
my
like,
gosh, I love that.
I love it too, and I'm like, "This is a win-win-win." Like, everyone gets one, and I won't have hundreds of paintings in the basement. But, like, it was fun, like, it was a thing that we all, like, talked about together, and he finds it funny and meaningful, and we're like,
Yeah,
"This is great."
yeah,
Everyone
yeah,
can have something that means something to him.
yeah.
It's also helps. And I also just thought, like, through that, this all came because I don't know if you've read The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, that book. It's sort of how one can clear out one's home as a gift to, the next generation by not leaving
Yeah.
all of your things. It's a great book, highly recommend. But they also made a TV show about it, executive produced by Amy Poehler, about going into people's homes and helping them deal with the, emotional blocks around getting rid of things
Ugh,
or organizing or, gifting in advance of one's death. And I invited both my parents when I was with them to watch an episode with me. Just to get them thinking about it. But just another way of starting conversations where in your, whether you've read a book that got you thinking, whether it's a show, there are
yeah,
ways in which to do this where it doesn't have to be just like, I want to talk about your death. Like,
right,
not
yeah.
to be like that.
I have not read it, but I know you and I talked about it, so I have it on my list. I really think that's brilliant because I can't. Yeah, this. In fact, I wrote a couple blog posts about this, and I got stuff that was just crazy. It's we. I always joke. I had this. My mother had these brass conquistador boots. I don't even know why she had these things. She loved them. I'm like, I got these, and I have not been able. Sadly, I am not the Swedish art of getting rid of things because I still have these things, and I keep threatening my brother and sister. I'm like, I'm going to send you each a boot, and you all can hang on to it for a while because we were at 10 years after my parents died. And there's just a couple other things, that I'm like, I don't know, but I do remember just trying to go through their stuff and what do I hold on to and what don't I hold on to? And uh, it's painful. So it's nice to my husband and I have told our kids, nothing is precious. You want it, keep it. You don't want it, if you can't sell it and you don't want it, donate it, whatever.
Well, I'm sure
Nothing is precious.
yeah, and that, like, relieves a burden, a
Yeah.
weight of feeling that guilt of, like, this meant something to them, it must mean something to me. That doesn't mean you have to trash everything, but
Right.
I think giving permission that, yeah, you can take a couple of items, but you don't have to keep all of our furniture in your basement for the rest of your lives is
Right.
also, like, a gift of, you don't
Yeah.
have to take me with you in that way. Uh
Yeah.
yeah,
Eh,
and I love that you were talking about, how you had these conversations with your brother and sister because that I think is a real thing that sandwich generation can get bogged down with in terms of, if someone does live close and they, what if they get most of the responsibility? Is there that resentment or that frustration? Or if one child sort of checks out, it's like, how do you sort of manage that.
Right. And I want to make one other point.
Yeah,
You referenced this book, and I think I'm seeing more books about stuff like this. Like I
yeah.
would also recommend Atul Gawende's book, Being Mortal. Just a really great, lovely, well-written um, book about end of life, and he's a
Yeah.
physician, so he talked about his evolution as a physician. Really good. But there's more and more, and then there are some, we get some more movies. We didn't used to have movies about a lot of these things. I mean,
No.
maybe death was the thing, but the caregiving wasn't the thrust of the movie, right? And TV shows. And I just finished the series, and I'm not going to remember the name of the series. I can't remember it exactly, but it's the Ted Danson series. And he
Oh,
goes to,
yeah.
what's it
Um,
called, Marty? Do you
mm,
remember?
I think it was like Man Undercover, Under
Yes, yes,
something like
yes,
on Netflix
yes,
about him going into the
yes,
nursing home as a private detective. It's a
yes.
wonderful series.
Yeah.
Love that.
And it was lovely, and I loved, I won't give anything away, but it was the relationship with his daughter too, who is a sandwich generation mom, right? She lost her
Yes,
mother, and now she's got kids, but it's just, and her relationship with her dad becomes part of it. And I think having those things out there for us to maybe watch and talk about can help us have those conversations too, right?
definitely.
Because we can reflect on something. And the sandwich generation is tough. I think one of the biggest things is parenting and caregiving are have very similar skill sets that we need to employ, but they're different because we're raising our kids up into independence, and then we might be supporting our parents while they're losing some independence. And so, how we have interactions with both of our constituencies, right? Our kids, our grandkids, and then our folks that are getting older might be a little bit different. So, those are some of the things that, I think we don't talk about enough because they do make a difference, and it can take a toll on you as the person in the middle. And I can attest, right? Because I was
Yeah.
there. But so I'm so glad we're having these conversations to get people to have more conversations, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Conversations to have conversations.
Absolutely.
Our tagline.
Um, yeah, that's our new tagline, right? So, where can people find you, Marnie?
You can find me at my business is Begin with the End, and it's beginwiththeend.co. Or you can email me, Marnie, Marni, at beginwiththeend.co. But you can always reach out on LinkedIn or Instagram also.
Right,
How about you,
great.
Christy?
So I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and I'm usually Christy B. Yates, and that's Christy, Christy, last name Yates, Yates. My website is ChristyYates.com. So Christy, ChristyYates.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and a lot of other places. And one of the other things I do, and so anybody out there listening on LinkedIn who might be work for corporations or companies, is I like to go into employee groups, support groups that they may have for caregivers or families, and I talk a little bit about the dynamics of being a working caregiver, which are really that's tricky and tough. And but most of us who are caregiving, you know, not all of us can leave our jobs and do this. And so if you're raising kids, a lot of us, if we're in a partnership, might have dual incomes. And so there's a lot of dynamics that go around that, a lot of wrinkles that come up through that. So yeah, but
Yeah.
reach out to us. We're going to do more of these, right? We're coming up next week. We're going to do something. And
Yeah, the next 3 more weeks after this is a 4-part series, and we're gonna sort of tackle different parts of the conversation.
yeah.
And if you have any feedback for us of things that you wanna hear about, we'd love to know. I see that there's a bunch of comments that we will read at a later date, but, yeah, no, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Marnie. Good to see you.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.